This is Polyphonic Press, the podcast where two music fans pick a classic album completely at random. Using the patented random album generator, they are given an album to review from a curated list of over 1,000 classic releases, spanning multiple genres. And now onto the show. Here are your hosts, Jeremy Boyd and John Van Dyke.
All right, hey, welcome to Polyphonic Press. I'm Jeremy Boyd.
I'm John Van Dyke.
And let's not waste any time. We've got the patented random album generator right in front of us here. So let's hit the button and see what album we're going to be listening to this week. And the album we're going to be listening to is Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique.
Oh.
All right. So I think this is their second album. And it is one of the most, as far as I know a little bit about this album, it's one of the most sample heavy hip hop albums.
Okay.
But this is what it says on allmusic.com. It says, such was the power of License to Ill that everybody, from fans to critics, thought that not only could the Beastie Boys not top the record, but that they were destined to be a one-shot wonder. These feelings were only amplified by their messy, litigious departure from Def Jam and their flight from their beloved New York to Los Angeles. Since it appeared that the Beasties had completely lost the plot, many critics, in fact, thought that Paul's Boutique was a muddled mess upon its summer release in 1989. But that's the nature of the record. It's so dense. It's bewildering at first, revealing its considerable charms with each play. But to put it mildly, it's a considerable change from the hard rock of License to Ill, shifting to layers of samples and beats, and so intertwined with they moved beyond psychedelic. It's a painting with sound. Paul's Boutique is a record that only could have been made in a specific time and place. Like the Rolling Stones in 1972, the Beastie Boys were in exile and pining for their homes, so they made a love letter to downtown New York, which they could not have done without the Dust Brothers, a Los Angeles-based production duo who helped redefine what sampling could be with this record. Sadly, after Paul's Boutique, sampling on the level of what's heard here would disappear due to a series of lawsuits. Most notably, Gilbert O'Sullivan's suit against Biz Markie, the entire enterprise too cost-prohibitive and risky to perform on such a grand scale, which is really a shame because if ever a record could be used as incontrovertible proof that sampling is its own art form, it's Paul's Boutique. Snatches of familiar music are scattered throughout the record, anything from Curtis Mayfield's Superfly and Sly Stone's Loose Booty, to Loggins and Messina's Your Mama Don't Dance, and the Ramones' Susie is a Headbanger. But never once are they presented in lazy, predictable ways. The Dust Brothers and Beasties weave a crazy quilt of samples, beats, loops, and tricks, which creates a hyper-surreal alternate reality. A romanticized funhouse reflection of New York where all pop music and culture exist on the same strata, feeding off each other, mocking each other, evolving into a wholly unique record. Unlike anything that came before or after, it very well could be that its density is what alienated listeners and critics at the same time. There is so much information in the music and words that it can seem impenetrable at first. But upon repeated spins, it opens up slowly, assuredly, revealing more every listen. Musically, few hip-hop records have ever been so rich. It's not just the recontextualization of familiar music via samples, it's the flow of each song and the album as a whole, culminating in the widescreen suite that closes the record. Lyrically, the Beasties have never been better, not just because their jokes are razor sharp, but because they construct a full-bodied narrative and evocative portraits of characters and places. Few pop records offer this much to savor, and if Paul's Boutique only made a modest impact upon its initial release, over time, its influence could be heard throughout pop and rap. Yet, no matter how its influence was felt, it stands alone as a record of stunning vision, maturity, and accomplishment. Plus, it's a hell of a lot of fun, no matter how many times you've heard it.
Okay.
So this is their second studio album. It was released on July 25th, 1989. Genres are hip hop and sampledelia. Label is Capitol Records and produced by the Beastie Boys, the Dust Brothers, and Mario Caldado Jr. And if you're listening along, which we encourage you to do, there are 15 songs on the album, and split between side A and side B is 8 songs, and then the rest 9 through 15 on side B. And the album, so if you're listening along, which we encourage you to do, and we've linked the album on both Spotify and Apple Music in the show notes, so you can get that on your preferred streaming service. And it starts with the song "To All the Girls," and side 1 ends with "Hey Ladies." So we'll pause there and discuss the album halfway through. And without further ado, here we go. Here is the first song on the album, "To All the Girls." Okay, so ending side 1 with "Hey Ladies," which is one of the singles off the album. I'm really enjoying this. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's definitely a different sort of thing. Like, it was never really my kind of thing, but there's a certain amount of it that's actually, I mean, having this play has given me a little hint of nostalgia for things like that. Like, this album is not one I'm like overly familiar with, and I've heard bits and pieces of, but just, I don't know, it would just, things from that era, the late 80s, early 90s, is just sort of popping into my head. It just seems to, I don't know, I was really young at the time, but yeah, I do have memories of it.
Yeah, I do remember hearing like that sort of era of hip hop, just throughout the world, just existing in the world, whether it's on the radio or whatever. I do remember hearing Beastie Boys. I don't remember the first thing I heard from them, but I always get that feeling because their voices are so distinct, and I like that they're so unique in, like, Run DMC kind of did it, where they would, one of them would say a line and all of them would say like the last word of the sentence, or the punchline, that sort of structure. And I think Run DMC kind of invented that. And then, but the Beastie Boys kind of like, they're sort of going back and forth. Like, a lot of the time, like a lot of rap groups, like one rapper will sing or rap a verse, and then they'll sort of take turns, but they're sort of almost like trading off, even like they'll switch mid-sentence.
They're very jumbled the way that it's almost like they're like a hive mind or something, like, where all three of them have like this, they want to convey this sort of the same sort of thing. Every once in a while one comes in with a different thought or something like that, but ultimately they're all very tied together and they're all very tight, and it comes out, and yeah, it's very jumbled, but not in a bad way. It's jumbled in a very organized way, and
it's like, yeah, it's organized chaos, I guess. No, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. And it's one of those things that it's just, I mean, their sense of humor is like, they're just funny. They don't take themselves too seriously. I think they take the music seriously, but they're sort of having fun within that, and it's funny, like the first album that they put out, License to Ill, it was more like juvenile sort of toilet humor, I suppose. And this is sort of like a little bit more
mature,
a little bit, but not not totally.
No.
You know, and it's funny at the time, like the album really at the time it was really well received critically. Like most of the critics gave it like 5-star reviews, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. Like I think this was one of the albums that really helped sort of make hip hop more of a mainstream thing. It was sort of in the 80s.
It was definitely heading in that trajectory. There were definitely things that were shooting it down the right pipeline. But this album was probably one of the ones that, sort of solidified it or presented itself in that way, I guess.
Yeah, it's sort of hit. This came out in '89, and it sort of set the trend for what hip hop would sound like in the '90s. I think too. I mean, because this is really different than anything else that was going on in hip hop at the time. Yes, there were samples, and yes, they were sort of building on it, but the way that this is put together is very unique, and it just sort of pulling samples like left and right and just like changing it up, and it's sort of like it's almost like the instrumentation and whatever samples, it's all built on samples. There's no live playing, so it's like all layered, and it's almost like that's sort of what's also keeping my attention. It's like, okay, what am I going to hear next? Like, am I going to recognize the song? And I've recognized a few songs that they've pulled from.
Even if I couldn't like place it, some of them I can.
The Sounds of Science, they used a few Beatles samples. I think When I'm 64, the reprise of Sgt. Pepper, they used the drums from that and the guitar from The End. If this were to be released now, today, I still think it would do something. I still think it would be like, I think it would turn heads and people go, well, like, what's that? I think it's kind of timeless. This, like,
yeah, I was just about to say something that it's definitely of its period, because it's just some of the sounds and things that they use are they were definitely fresh and new at the time and weren't commonly known, but they've become sort of like tropes from the 80s and 90s. But to say that because they're the ones who set the trend in a way, but yeah, I think it would come off as a bit of a retro thing. That's not to say it's not enjoyable, but I'm not 100% sure how timeless it is. It's of its period, but...
It's of its period, yeah, but I think if it were... If this didn't exist in '89 and, and nothing else was different, but this just wasn't around, and it came out now, today, I think it would, because I think it would create something, and I think it would be so different in terms of, because they were really the only ones doing this level of sampling, because like a lot of hip hop will be like, we'll just sample the drums and we'll have the drum beat, we'll loop the drum beat, and that'll play throughout the whole song, and then we'll take a guitar from this and that'll go through the whole song or repeat. With what they're doing here is like they do that for a bit, and then they'll go in a completely different direction, and that'll be a new sort of set of samples, and then they'll go back maybe, but not quite the same, and they're just mixing and blending. That's what I think is different, and that's what I think is timeless, is sort of the way they're doing it. Like, it does sound like 1989, but the the structure of it is like sort of an island unto itself.
Yeah, I agree that the structure is definitely unique. Doing what they're doing is it's hard to say if anybody's really done that. I mean, I can't think of sampling is definitely stuck around, but to this extent, I think it was actually kind of bold because I think they put themselves up to a lot of questionable legal positions by putting out this record.
And that's a good transition. I did find a few facts about the album. So, although this album was critically praised, it really didn't do well commercially when it was first released. I guess people were expecting the same from License to Ill. And if you listen to License to Ill, it's produced by Rick Rubin, and he was more interested in like crossing genres and making more of a rock album with rapping over top of it, which is fine, and that's it's a good album. I'm not saying that that's bad.
This is kind of that too, though, but again, without using samples almost exclusively, but there's still a lot of rock and roll in it.
And they had a dispute with their old record company, which is owned by Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons, Def Jam, and they were being stiffed on royalties for the sales of that album, which was a big hit. So they moved from New York, they moved to Los Angeles, and they signed with Columbia Records. And this album is produced by the Dust Brothers. And the Dust Brothers, they're a duo who produced a lot of stuff in the 90s. And we actually reviewed one of the albums that they did. They did Beck's Odelay album.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like, as soon as I saw it, it's like, okay, yeah, I can hear it. I can definitely hear it. They also worked with bands like the Rolling Stones. They did The Offspring and a band called They Might Be Giants, which is a good sort of indie rock band. It's funny. I think this is the most sampled album, and this album could never really be done again because getting the license for all the songs to be used would be way too expensive. They kind of did it without asking permission and then dealt with it later.
But they also did it at a time when the precedent really wasn't set for such a thing. So there was no legal precedent for them to go through. They kind of, I mean, obviously they could have asked like permissions and stuff like that, but a lot of people wouldn't have gotten what they were doing. And so they kind of didn't have much of a choice but to just go ahead and do it. So, and then, ask, shoot first, beg for forgiveness later sort of thing.
Apparently, eventually, most of the samples were eventually cleared, but there were a few lawsuits. It says, contrary to popular belief, most of the sampling for Paul's Boutique was eventually cleared, but at dramatically lower costs compared to today's rate, which is why this album could never be made again. So,
unless you're like a billionaire.
Yeah, exactly. It says Mario Caldado Jr., the engineer on the album, said, "We realized we had spent a lot of money in the studio. We had spent about $250,000 in rights and licensing for samples. So just the samples alone cost $250,000.
Okay, yeah, that again sounds a lot cheaper than expect now, but it's still not a small price, but it's under the millions, which is, you would not be under the millions now.
No, there's no way. No way.
It's a decent chunk of change, but it's way less than what you would expect.
So this is, and I found a quote from Mike D, who's during an interview in Vibe magazine, Mike D was asked about any possible hesitation he or the band might have had regarding their overt sampling of several minutes of well-known Beatles background tracks, including the song The End on The Sounds of Silence. He claimed that the Beatles filed a preliminary legal papers and that his response was, "What's cooler than getting sued by the Beatles?"
Well, look at it, I guess. I don't know. Personally, I would want a little more friendly relationship, but they did it. I kind of have to respect them to a certain degree for having the balls that they did, for putting this together the way they did, and again, because there was no precedent to do it, like asking for permission for samples. If it was a thing, it was so rarely done that it just it's unprecedented.
Yeah, no, it's like I can imagine some of the artists, like if you were to ask permission and go like, so wait a minute, you're gonna take my song and you're gonna make a new song out of it? Like, I don't understand how that works. Like, there's like, how do you ask? It's like, yeah, we want to take your song and make another song on top of it. So can we do that? It's
or
like,
more specifically, we want to take this guitar part, loop it, and rap over it.
Right.
I mean, it sounds so completely logical when I say it that way, but in 1989...
yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't know, has that ever been done before? It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so like, yeah, obviously drum beats and stuff, but, that's one thing. But, yeah, this is a whole new level. All right, let's get into the second side of the album. But before we do that, though, let's hear from our friends over at Getting Down and Wordy.
Riz.
Greetings.
Gendered language.
Onomatopoeias.
The ick.
What makes some words sound funny?
Why just listen to music when you can overanalyze the words in the songs?
Music, language, and Eurovision all crammed into one podcast.
Getting down and wordy with Russell and Hannah. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Okay, and ending the album with AWOL, which is part of the B-Boy Bouillabaisse suite. Yeah, this album is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I don't really know what else to say. I mean, it's one of those albums that it's not really something I normally listen to, but it's just I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's just one of those things, I think.
Yeah, I sort of enjoyed it too. I don't know if I enjoyed it as much as you did. If I were to listen to it again, it'd probably be around, I'd have to wait a little while, but I do like it. It is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it had a huge impact on the music scene going forward. I mean, it's sort of, like I said, it sort of set the blueprint for a lot of stuff, not just hip hop, but a lot of stuff that would happen in the 90s production wise. Like I said, the Dust Brothers did Beck's Odelay, which has a lot of similarities to the production on this one. And I mean, overall I think it's an important album, and I think it's it's culturally relevant in, like I said, ushering in the sort of mainstreaming of hip hop, whereas before, like it had been happening before, but this is one of the albums that really made it, sort of
brought it to the forefront.
Yeah, and sort of solidified it as a legitimate art form and not just something that was sort of on the fringes and in the streets, sort of.
Right. Yeah, especially the whole sampling thing. I mean, you put out an album like this, and inevitably, I think, through all sorts of different channels, whether you're in talks with whoever created the sample to begin with, whether or not you're in a legal battle with them or you're just trying to figure out where you stand on this sort of thing, you were gonna come out with the album was eventually basically going to set the precedent for sampling going ahead in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And you can, if you wanted to sample a song, you can, and now there is a precedent. It's like, okay, this exists. Hey, can we use your song to do something like this? And I go, yeah, sure. But, as long as I get, proper licensing and everything and do it, that was huge. That was sort of that's sort of part of making it more of a mainstream thing. Because, and I think I think before this, when they would use a sample, they would sort of just look the other way. But I think this being so blatant,
yes,
and sort of so many, it's over 105 different songs are sampled on this thing.
And it was, a popular artist at the time that did it.
And, it solidified the Beastie Boys in that sort of, I think they were kind of looked down upon other hip hop artists because they're a bunch of Jewish kids from Brooklyn. They're not exactly they're not exactly the stereotype, and it's sort of, but I think one of the quotes was from Chuck D, who from Public Enemy. So in an interview with all three Beastie Boys, Chuck D of Public Enemy was quoted as saying that the dirty secret among the black hip-hop community at the time of the release was that Paul's Boutique had the best beats. And so they were sort of accepted in the hip-hop community, whereas before they were sort of seen as a joke with their first album. It's like, oh, these white kids are, making stupid, toilet humor and, but then it's like this comes out. It's like, oh, they're actually serious. They actually love this art form, and it's like they were sort of embraced by the community. So yeah, I think that sort of legitimized them and sort of made them worth sticking around. And they had a lot more success in the 90s after this. I mean, even though this was commercially sort of a disappointment, critically this album was praised, and that sort of carried them through. And I think they had a big hit with the follow-up to this album. So yeah, so that's the major, I think that's the sort of influence that they had on the future artists that would come along. So I guess this might be hard because there's so many songs on here, but what if you could pick what are your three favorite songs?
The Sounds of Science was fun, and might be just because of the Beatles riff, which I've always loved. I always thought that riff, and I guess so did they. Found it very, very easy to listen to, easy to rock to. Anyway, yeah, that's a good track. Shadrach was pretty good. If I remember correctly, I think Eggman was kind of funny.
Yeah, I think if I were to pick my three favorites, I think I would probably go with, Shadrach was good. I really liked the rock samples on Looking Down the Barrel of a Gun.
Oh yeah, I like that one too. In fact, I'd probably replace Eggman with Looking Down the Barrel of a Gun, to be perfectly honest.
I think Hey Ladies, I like that one because that's a song that I knew that song before, and I always liked that one.
I mean, if you're not, referencing Jerry Lewis, you're referencing the Beastie Boys when you say
Exactly.
"Hey, ladies." So
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No. Exactly. Yeah. So I guess the question is, would you listen to the album again?
Yeah, I think I said this before, but yes, I probably would. But I'd probably have to wait a little while. I'd have to be in the right mood for it. But I'd probably listen to it again. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would too. I mean, I enjoyed it. I think the Beastie Boys are a lot of fun. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite Beastie Boys album, but I would definitely listen to it again. I do like some of their later stuff, but yeah, this definitely sort of made them. This is sort of the beginning of that sort of era of their career. So I guess we'll end the episode there. Thank you so much for listening if you made it this far. If you enjoyed the show, we would encourage you to share the show with your friends. Just text one friend who you think would enjoy the show, and just let them know that we exist, basically, and just say, hey, check this out, and spread the word that way, and that really helps out the show. And if you feel inclined, you can always help us out on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/polyphonicpress, and you can get these episodes the day before they go live, and you can even pick an album for us to review. And you can also follow us on Instagram. I'll put a link to all those in the show notes to this episode. And I think that just about does it. I'm Jeremy Boyd.
And I'm John Van Dyke.
Take it easy.